Interesting. You know, the the federal government has become very concerned about making sure that all handicapped children get an equal educational opportunity, like, you know, normal children. And so they devised a federal program to make sure that handicapped children were given an education. Now, when they were talking about handicapped children, they meant children deaf, dumb, blind, crippled. You know, the speech impaired, the mentally retarded, the seriously emotionally disturbed, the hard of hearing and deaf, the orthopedically handicapped, the visually handicapped, multi-handicapped, deaf and blind. But you know what is now the largest single group of children in handicapped education? The learning disabled. These are perfectly normal kids who are very articulate, sometimes above average intelligence, and they are now the largest single group in special ed. As a matter of fact, and it's a growing group. In 1976, the number of learning disabled kids in these handicap programs was 796,000. In 1984, that figure was up to 1,806,000. So we're creating learning disabled kids. You know, we can't keep up with them. The schools are so successful in destroying the minds of American youngsters that, you know, they can't even keep up with them. It is now the single largest group of handicapped children under the handicap programs. A program that was devised for really handicapped children. The deaf, the dumb, the blind, the crippled. Now, the so-called learning disabled are the largest group. And in the state of California, out of 370,000 handicapped children, do you know how many are learning disabled? 207,000 in the state of California. You've got a problem in this state. I think that Dr. Honig should address this problem. I know he's very concerned about teaching evolution. I think he ought to be concerned about teaching reading. I think it's much more important to make sure that children learn to read than know about Darwin's theory. But I haven't heard that Dr. Honig is terribly concerned about this. Now, what has this done to America? What has it done to the black community? In 1930, the illiteracy rate among urban blacks was 9.2%, which means that in 1930, over 90% of urban blacks were literate. And in 1930, when you were literate, you could read anything. There was no such thing as functional illiteracy. If you were literate, you were literate. Today, in 1984, the illiteracy rate is now 50% among blacks. Now, have blacks lost the ability to learn to read since 1930? And in 1930, what did you have? You had Jim Crow, racial discrimination, segregated schools, poor educational facilities, and yet over 90% of urban blacks were literate. Today, with affirmative action, civil rights victories, billions of federal dollars in the elementary schools, compensatory education programs like Title I and Chapter I, equal educational opportunities, what more could you possibly do in terms of money and facilities? And yet the illiteracy rate is now up to 50%. What we are doing is destroying the black community. They have become an underclass. They cannot even fit into American society. They cannot fit into our high-tech culture. They have no stake in it. They're into drugs. Teenage pregnancy is rampant among them. They are literally being destroyed by our education system. And to give you an idea of what this is doing to the blacks, how it is alienating them from the rest of society, how we are isolating them through this change in language, because they can't even speak, most of them can't even speak decent English anymore, despite the fact that they all go to school. You know, the NAACP has spent years making sure that they went to public schools. Well, now they're in public schools. But maybe you'll be interested in listening to what was said on Dan Rather's program not too long ago about what is happening to the blacks' use of language. Let me turn this on. This was a recording of a news program. It'll come on shortly.
4 centuries later. But beyond the melting pot, there is an English evolving in these United States which is incomprehensible to the majority. Bob Simon looks at what happens when the rules of grammar clash with the laws of the marketplace.
Boys and girls, we can never be back. Go hug. Don't stop. Listen to a lot of street talk, a little music. That's all rapping is. Performance as communication. One way, blacks in the inner city talk to each other. One way. There are many others.
I'll say, hey, that little girl, she's fresh, man. She got a nice bumper kid or some cakes, you know. And they'll understand what I'm saying, you know.
They'll buy a pair of sneakers, right? And one would say to me, oh, that's the Jordan, right? What is the Jordan, right? But I know what it is. That means that the sneakers are really nice. I walk up to you and say, hey, dude, what's up?
You might not know what the mean term of butter is, but butter also translate cocaine. I'm too cold for the whole fucking thing in your face.
What you're hearing is not slang or dialect. It's a language with its own grammar and syntax, as native to the American ghetto as French is to France. What's new is the finding by the University of Pennsylvania that this language is traveling further and further from standard English, deepening the divide between the ghetto and the rest of the United States.
Kicking that beat, and I never stop. I never stop.
That's a warning sign that we're heading towards a world which is divided into two camps, black and white. The isolation of that inner city population is our big problem. Economically, there are no jobs, housing is a problem, and the language situation is reflecting that.
So we got to have our survival mechanism within our community. And our language is it. It lets us know that we're all in this thing together.
Black English is not standard English spoken badly. Black English is revenge.
I think part of it is defiance of the society that hasn't let them in, and part of it is the sheer desperate disadvantage of today's ghetto.
Every time any American talks about making it or getting kicks or running scared, he's talking Black English that came from the ghetto. Words have always crossed over. But these days, there are more and more words that don't. Man says to a dog, get out the way or I'll be done, go upside your head. Now that be done can't be translated that easily because what it means is just as sure as a God in heaven, I'm going to kick you out of the way if you don't get out of the way. And here's the vicious circle. The language born in the ghetto reinforces its walls. This new language barrier creates new borders which are difficult to cross.
I have some associates that find it very difficult to work and maintain any kind of decent job because of the fact that they cannot adequately speak, so to speak, the normal language.
I'm sure that if you walked up to one of those people and explained to them that you'll put them in a wealthy position if they could correct their English, they would correct their English. Her hobbies is singing. Her hobbies are singing.
There are techniques for teaching English to foreigners, techniques which are being used in watts today to teach English as a second language to 50,000 black Americans, just as if they were from Poland or Puerto Rico.
What do Mama know about parties? Stuff she haven't even done. She was trying to wrap my action, keeping me from having fun.
Before they started school, many of the black kids had never even met whites. They're learning standard English as the white man's tongue. Not better or richer than black English, but the language of the marketplace.
Verb is raised.
If you don't know how to speak proper English, they won't understand what you're saying. You won't get hired or anything like that. We're speaking about the cash language of the society. And it's a competitive society, and our children must be able to compete if they are to move into the mainstream of America.
Well, the point is very clear. They say black English is revenge. Revenge for what? For the fact that the schools have destroyed their ability to even speak their own language. He said they're now like Poles, like immigrants. They have to be taught English as if they come from a foreign country. Isn't that interesting? Blacks probably have deeper roots in America than most Americans today because they came over, you know, many years ago. And in the 1930s, they spoke well. We've literally destroyed them. Literally destroyed them. The school system has destroyed them. And I put a great deal of blame and responsibility on black leadership that has permitted this to happen. Because they have supported the public schools all of these years. They have insisted that the blacks go to the public schools. But you see, we know how to teach reading today. There's no big mystery to it. Marva Collins does it in Chicago, doesn't she? Marva Collins is that black teacher who taught in the Chicago schools for 14 years and finally left in utter disgust and frustration and created her own private school. And there she has taken youngsters who are considered uneducable by the public schools, and she's turned them into literate human beings. They read Shakespeare. They read Aristotle. They have no problem reading these things. They're being taught correctly, finally. The model is there. We know how to teach reading. It's no big mystery. Thousands of Christian schools do it every day in America. I visited a school in Anchorage, Alaska, the Harvester Christian School, which has been in existence for 16 years. And in all that time, they haven't had a single dyslexic child. You see, evolution is passing them by. It's going around them. But you see, we have the cure. We know how to teach reading, but the professors and the schools resist and resist and refuse to change. As a matter of fact, here in California, in 1982, your textbook adoption committee, your state committee, chose all look-say reading programs for the elementary schools of California, guaranteeing that you will have functional illiteracy well into the 21st century in this state. This is something that Dr. Honig, I think, should address. But that's not the only problem. That's not the only problem. You see, the children in American schools are at risk in 4 ways. They're at risk academically for the reasons I've outlined to you. They're destroying their minds. They're destroying their ability to think, to read, to grow. We're creating mentally stunted human beings, crippled human beings, academically because of the animal training techniques that are used in American schools. 30% of the children who go into American schools come out academically damaged in that way. 30% risk. Now, would you fly in an airline with a 30% failure rate? Would you buy a car from a manufacturer that produced 30% lemons? But we routinely put children in schools with a 30% failure rate, and we wonder why little Johnny comes out ruined. But then there's also the spiritual risk.